Hello, everyone, and welcome to Healing and Reconnecting in Relationships. We have an incredible expert with us today. And before we get started, my name is Kasia Bradford, and I am the host of this series. This series has been created for those of you who desire deeper connections in your relationships, and also those of you who are looking for healing in this area. You will hear from amazing people who will share their wisdom, as well as their tips and tools that you'll be able to implement in your life as you embark on the journey of deepening your relationships. So it is our vision that by the end of the series, you will step into your power and reclaim the relationships in your life. So without further ado, I am so excited to introduce our guest today, Joan Childs. Joan is a psychotherapist, an inspirational speaker, and an author. Thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So Joan, I will put the spotlight on you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to do the work that you're doing with couples and relationships and all that beautiful stuff?
Okay, well, at an autobiographical level, I'm 82 years old, and I've been in private practice for 44 years. I deal primarily with individuals and couples. Up until a few years ago, I had group therapy also for over 37 years. I got too old to stay up to 10 o'clock at night, so I gave that up. That was part of the beginning of sort of a semi-retirement. And I've written 3 books that have been published. The last one is primarily geared towards relationships, and it's called I Hate the Man I Love. A conscious relationship is your key to success. And if you want to know how that came about, the birth of that, I'll share that with you, but I don't want to take up too much time. So you'll have to give me the green light and let me know.
Tell us a little bit about that. I think that's amazing, because conscious relationships is we hear it all the time, but not all of us understand the concept.
Well, it's really that you don't hate the man you love. You just hate some of the behavior of that man that you love. But as it came about over the 44 years, especially I think about the last 20, I noticed that there was a lot of bitterness with women, and they weren't ashamed to use words that I can't even use on this podcast. But just to give you an example, I would hear them over and over, with or without their spouses or partners, saying, I hate him, I hate him, I hate him, about 2 or 3 times to really make sure I understood that they hated him. And they would call him names that I can't repeat on a podcast, but something like, he's a jerk, he's clueless, he doesn't pay attention to me. And so I would say things like, or they would get up, and if they were with their spouse or partner, they would usually, and this could be, gay couples as well as straight couples, they would get up and they would say, I'm done. And some of them were extremely melodramatic, and they would just march out of the room, slam the door, and you could hear their heels clicking down the way. I never had that with men. For some reason, a man, even though he might hate some of the behavior of a woman in a relationship, I never heard them be so contentious. So they weren't as vitriolic as women were. And so they'd come back, the woman would come back a week later with or without her partner, and she would say the same thing. I hate him. I can't stand him. I just, they would have these grunts and screeches and all this kind of shrieking and sound like a shrew. And then I would say, so you hate, why are you with a man that you hate? And so they would all say the same thing over and over all these years. Because I love him, that would be their response. So I would say, so then you hate the man you love? And they would say, yeah, exactly. So I thought to myself, that's a great title for a book. I Hate the Man I Love. So, and that's how it was born, out of the mouths of babes, not babies, but women. And again, I want to say this is not a male bashing book, because men never used the expression that I hate her. I've never heard a man say that. He might find fault, and he might say that she doesn't understand me, or, she spends too much money, but I never heard the expression of I hate. I heard it from women over and over again. So it really is earmarked from the mouths of women. And that's how it came to be. That's how that was born. And if you go back and you see it on the backdrop of our society, if you hear movies or you see, whether you see movies and books, not so much books, but songs, there's a lot of hate love expressions in a lot of the films and a lot of the music that we have. So there is a concept of love and hate existing simultaneously. You can have oppositional feelings coexisting simultaneously in all relationships, even as parents with children. Sometimes you hate their behavior and you don't really hate them, but you have this mixed feeling of, what was I thinking? I had 5 children, so I can be a protagonist for that. So it's a very common thing, in human beings to have love and hate side by side. Today, however, in these times with the political issues and what's going on and the war in Ukraine and the pandemic, the word hate has become, in all of the hate crimes, the word hate has become a nasty, nasty word. So I wrote that book before all this happened, before the pandemic, before everything else, even before the political divisiveness in the United States, because we are now 2 countries. Definitely, it's not the United States of America, it's the divided states of America. I hate to say that, because I grew up I was born in 1939 and then grew up in the 50s in my early age. And we just had a different world. We can't even raise your children today the way I was raised, because the way I was raised, the world is a different world today. So I'm kind of like not proud of the word. I hate the man I love, but it was written before hate became such a nasty word. So that's how it was born.
Yeah.
And,
Thank you for sharing that.
and what I want to say is, when I focus on it, I try to highlight, what do you love about him, if you say you love him, so that they can recognize that this is very normal, and that you can have oppositional feelings coexisting simultaneously with your parents, with your children, with your neighbors, with your friends, and certainly with your partners and spouses. So we try to have corrective experiences and look at the whole person rather than that part. And women are a lot more talkative than men. They have their, if you go back anthropologically all through time, women were considered the keepers of the hearth and the chatterers, men the warriors and the hunters. And to be honest with you, even though I'm a feminist and I was part of the women's movement, I don't think it's changed much, to tell you the truth. I think we're biologically wired the way we're wired. So
yeah, that is true. That is true. And I know what you're saying about the word hate now too, but it is such a thing that we, in our everyday language, we just use it. I hate this or I hate that, and it's it's kind of like almost lighter than when we look at the world at large. But it's interesting as you were talking about that, because like with kids, I know we sometimes despise our kids' behaviors. Now, do we as women actually say, I hate my children also? Like, have you found that?
I've heard that, they don't really say it like I hate, they'll say, I hate them, I hate her. Sometimes I can't stand her. Sometimes I'd like to just punch her in the face. I've heard that, but they would never act out on it. They just get to exasperation levels of frustration.
Yeah.
Because they really, it's really about being conscious as a parent, as well as being conscious as a mate. To be able to get to that level of consciousness, because we are all wired for connection, are hardwired for connection. And what happens is that when we go into a disconnect, we go into crisis, and then we kind of lose ourselves. We kind of like say things we really don't mean, and we act out. I mean, there are some people that, of course, have taken it to a degree where it's abuse, actual abuse. A large proportion of humanity is abusive to there's domestic violence, and there's child abuse. So it is part of our culture, unfortunately, and different cultures feel differently about children, that they possess them or own them. So they have the right to hit them, spank them, punish them. But in my profession, we are very protective of children and elderly who can't really protect themselves. So there's a lot of punishment for parents who behave like that. And different cultures have different ways of handling children. So it's you have to really understand as a therapist, you have to understand the culture, the background, without being judgmental, but trying to have a corrective experience, both in relationships with partners and with family systems, because everybody comes from a different family system. I have a couple right now that she's from Georgia and he's from Romania, and boy, how do you negotiate that? So it's more difficult. There's a certain wisdom in sticking to your own kind, that's for sure.
That's a very interesting point. I never thought about it that way, but you bring two completely different cultures and upbringings together, and that's a whole other set of challenges, I guess, that you'll face together, whether you decide to do that or not. Can you speak a little bit to the idea of like conscious relationships, the consciousness of it? We're hearing a lot about that now, but people who are not familiar with what that actually means, could you just speak a little bit to that?
Sure, absolutely. Consciousness, you can use the other word mindful, you can use the word attuned, awareness. There's a lot of words that would describe it. We've been using conscious because most of us get into relationships more unconsciously than consciously. We just kind of do what comes naturally and not being conscious of what the implications are, or the what ifs. We stay just in the moment of our feelings. And so consciousness really means to take the elevator up from the lower part of our brain, which is the reptilian, which is reactive, fight or flight, and take the elevator up past the limbic system, which is the seat of emotions, take it all the way up to the neocortex, which is your computer, which is where you think, and then take it over to the frontal lobe, where you reflect on what you're thinking about. That's a 4-step process so that you don't get reactive. You're able to be proactive, which most of us aren't, because in our daily lives, we work, we have to deal with all the things that are going on that we have absolutely no control over. Like right now, the COVID has been a big part of our unhappiness. We had to change our lives completely, and it's been going on very long. It wasn't short term. It's still going on in some countries worse than others, where we had to wear masks and breathe in carbon dioxide and for more than 2 years now. And in my profession as a psychotherapist, I went and closed my office after 42 years, almost 2 years now, a year and a half. I've closed my office that I've been in for all those years because it wasn't safe. So we had to re-engineer ourselves and go on Zoom and do it online. And of course, that's not as effective as being eyeball to eyeball in person, where I can be anchoring, and that has to be done with touching. So we cut ourselves off from giving our clients and patients the full Monty. Sometimes you feel very limited and restricted on online therapy. So going back to consciousness, like I said, that we're hardwired for connection. And the relationship, whether it's with, it doesn't matter who it's with, if you're in a relationship that's a marriage or a partnership, or you have a relationship with your daughter or your son or your grandparents, whatever that relationship is, it doesn't live in you and I. The relationship lives in the relational space between each person. Now, when that space becomes polluted over time, then the space becomes uncomfortable. And then each person reacts to the discomfort in the space. And then what happens, it becomes dangerous. And then each person reacts in the danger in the space, and each person can be different. Some people can, get in your face and scream, and other people can withdraw and become constricted. And that space, that relational space, really, according to Martin Buber, the Jewish philosopher, that is supposed to be sacred space, and it has to be cleansed so that it stays sacred. and not just for the couple, but because that's the playground for the children. So they grow up in that space. And if that space becomes polluted over time, the children feel the tension and they want to make it right. And they don't know how to, they're just too young. So they take on the feelings of the parents, and that's what children do. They absorb that. So then you have multi-generational toxic shame, so to speak. You recreate what you only know what you know. So how parents model their relationship is how children will model it. And when we go into a relationship, what happens too often, and I think this is almost universal, doesn't matter unless it's an arranged marriage. Those people that don't go to and don't have arranged marriages, that we choose our own partners, we do it unconsciously, and we choose people who are going to give us the biggest nightmares of our lives in order to help us work through and resolve the unresolved conflicts of our wounded childhood. And then we hire them for that purpose unconsciously, and they hire us, and then we end up firing them for the very reason we hired them. That's why we have over 50% divorce. So getting conscious, and that's hard to do when you get married young. I mean, I was married when I was 19. I didn't know, I didn't know who I was and what I wanted. I only knew my parents told me, marry a Jewish doctor, have 5 children, and live happily ever after. And I believe them, because we tend to mythologize our parents. Yes. We tend to deify them. We think they know everything. And yes. Of course, they're only human. Of course, they don't know. And every generation changes. When I got married at 19, the average age today that girls get married is somewhere between 28 and 30. I was 19. Yeah. So I'm a product of a lot of bad choices, a lot. So, and I had 5 kids in the middle of all of this. So, and divorced, and then being a single parent, divorced with 5 children, that was a hell of a lot of trials and tribulations. The children really take on, the radioactive fallout from the breach, from the breakage of the marriage, because the marriage really is children look at it like an egg. They see a mother and father like one egg. And so when it cracks and breaks, their hope and dreams, their fantasy is to put it back together. So that's not their job. Yeah. So anyway, getting conscious is really absolutely necessary for a healthy adult relationship. Being aware, being attuned to your partner. And this is something couples cannot do alone. You need to have some kind of marital or couples counseling. And I've had several mentors in my 44 years of experience, from the grade and the near grade. And the last one I had was Hedy Schleifer, who is renowned master relationship therapist all over the world. She speaks 7 languages, so she can do her work all over. And I spent 12 years with her, going to her workshops, because I was fascinated. She took imago therapy to the next level. And I was also an imago therapist and did that. And it was wonderful. And everyone so many therapists contributed to the way we're doing it now. So I can't give her all the credit, but I certainly give her credit for her contribution, which was extraordinary. And I used it to today, but you have to be selective in who you choose, because in order for relationships to be repaired, each party in the relationship has to be all in. Mm-hmm. You need a big fat yes from each person. If it's a man and a woman, a man and a man, each partner has to be all in to move that relationship forward and learn what it takes to become reconnected. So that's really the job of the therapist, to do it. I don't know too many. I don't think it's possible to do it without. It's like trying to fix your own broken leg. You need someone there to help you. So that's basically what I do with couples, and trying to help them become conscious. And so the work that I do in my book, I actually have 2 chapters that you would see how it's done. It's like being a fly on the wall. You're actually visualizing the reading of a book. It could have been a video just to see how it's done. So I don't know if it was a long-winded answer. I'm sorry.
No, I love it. I love it. There's so much in there. I have so many questions about what you said. So I'll just start with the space that you said, like the relationship exists in its own space. Now, how do we prevent that space from getting polluted?
Okay, that's a very good question. I'm glad you asked. Through the concept of consciousness, you have to be aware of what you're doing to contribute to it. And usually in a relationship, one person is maybe more aggressive than the other. One is more, I would say, I'm trying to think of a right word. Maybe I wouldn't want to say submissive, but one could be submissive, one could be more aggressive. And who wears the pants, so to speak, in the relationship. And it's not always the man, by the way, and it's not always the woman. So, or it isn't always one woman versus another woman. Depends on the personality. One's more dominating, one's more recessive. And that's usually the way it goes. It's very hard to get two people that are aggressive. It's very unusual. And the same thing with two people that are submissive. Nothing gets done. So they can borrow and lend to each other their strength, because everybody has their own strengths. And it's really showing, learning how to be present. That's the first part of being conscious. But what I do is I take the couple and I put them in two chairs and I sit sort of not in between them, but adjacent to them. And this is Hetty's work, Hetty Schleifer's work, and it works beautifully. But again, depending upon how serious and how much that couple wants to restore their relationship. So I teach them the art of presencing, and that's very simple. When you're falling in love, you're looking into each other's eyes and you become symbiotic. That's the first stage of every relationship. And you stare at each other and you just, can't get enough of each other. But that doesn't last more than 18 months. It quickly dissipates. Well, not quickly, but over 18 months usually. It can be before, it can be a little longer. And then people just stop looking into the eyes of one another. And through the eyes is the windows to the soul of the person, to their authenticity, to their essence. So when you're talking and you're looking away, or you're on your computer, or you're just not focusing on each other, you cannot. That art of presencing loses its strength. It doesn't really maintain. So I start out by putting them face to face, 18 inches apart, because 18 inches is when you hold up an infant in your arms from their eyes to your eyes. It's 18 inches. There's a wonderful video that I'll let you know called the Still Face Experiment. STILLFACE experiment. You can get it on YouTube. And it shows how presencing is done between a mother and a child. And when she becomes unengaged, first when she's engaged, the child is very affable and pointing. It's only a baby, maybe a year old. And, just very comfortable in the high chair. And the mother is totally engaged. And then they ask the mother not to have any expression on her face, just to have a still face. See, within moments, you can see how that baby becomes so stressed out and more stressed out and they only want her to do it for 2 minutes. By the time the 2 minutes is gone by, the baby is trying to get out of the chair and crying and screeching and just because she loses eye contact and facial expressions are still face. So that's a wonderful visual to be able to see what I'm talking about. So, and with couples, when I put them face to face, I have them hold hands. They sit 18 inches apart. Usually it's one person puts their feet in the other person's legs. Usually I'll have the woman do it to the man, but not necessarily. If it's a lesbian relationship, a gay relationship, it doesn't matter. One person puts their legs into the legs of the other. They hold hands, not connected tight, but separate on their legs. They hold hands and they feel each other's skin, because nobody knows the skin of the partner as much as the other partner. So they're touching hands, they're holding hands. And I mean, I can do this on video, on online telehealth therapy, but it's much better when I'm in person because I'm right there in their face also. And I'm touching them. I'm actually touching them. I'm putting their hands where they're supposed to be placed. And I just say, now I just want you to look into the eyes of, look who showed up. Look who's here. How about that? And look into their eyes and just stay focused only on their eyes. You can smile, you can laugh, but just stay with the eyes connected to one another. You would be surprised how they begin to cry. How that's the beginning of connection. It's the art of presencing, eyeball to eyeball. And I don't have them say a word. That's the first part of how I start with the therapy. And then I go into explaining. I have a lot of explaining and education and guidance to give them because it's a very structured therapy. It isn't that they're both sitting on a couch and I'm sitting looking at both of them. I'm going, this one's saying this one's saying this is like a tennis match. It's not like that at all. They're only allowed to say 5 to 8 words when I give them the instructions. There's no chatter at all. And so they have to learn how to give specific sensory based information rather than just, be defending each other, their position, because it can become a defending match where one criticizes the other and the other one defends and then one judges the other. And I don't allow that. It's not allowed. And so this is why it's important to choose a couple that really wants to move forward, because you can't get the results if there's any kind of where one is not 100% in and wants to blame the other for the problem. It's not a blame game, and I don't allow that. I don't allow judgment or criticism, contemptuous stuff, defensiveness, stonewalling. And now they're adding gaslighting to the whole system. And this is what I'm saying. There's these different elements of destructive behavior comes from John Gottman, who was a very, very famous, also like Hetty, relationship master counselor. And originally he called it the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. These are the 4 things that'll destroy any relationship: criticism, contempt, judgment, and defensiveness. And I've added, stonewalling, and I've added gaslighting to it, because there's a lot of gaslighting going on where you try to make the other person think that they're crazy. So all that has to be considered, but that's why it's very limited in words. They can't be cross-talking at all. All they have to do, what I'm trying to teach them is the art of presencing, the art of listening. And the way we know that they're listening is they have to repeat what they heard. So they each have a role in this. One is a host and the other one is a visitor. And each has a structured what they need to do, like a script. And they can choose whether they want to be the host or they want to be the visitor, because they're going to have alternative. So I say, who would like to be the visitor? And I explain to them what they're doing, that they are actually going to leave their neighborhood where they live, and they're going to cross an imaginary bridge and go to the other person's neighborhood, the other world of the other. And they can't take any of their own stuff with them, means no of their preconceptions, and none of their ideas, none of what they think is right or wrong. They have to just come over with what Hetty calls a plastic bag. I don't have one here, with a passport and a visa. And the reason it has to be clear is you have to see what they're bringing over. They're not allowed to bring over their own prejudices, their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own what they think is right, conceptions. They have to leave all that on their side. This is why it's very guided. And that's the visitor's job, to come over on an imaginary bridge to their host, their partner's neighborhood. And they have to announce when they arrive. The host has to say that, thank you for coming. I want to take you down a street in my neighborhood called, and I let them choose, what do they want to talk, what do they want to address? So it could be loneliness, anger, frustration, or something very specific, the way you are with your mother, my mother-in-law, could be anything at all, or my hurt, my anxiety, or down the street of disappointment. They can choose any one word that would describe what they want to share with their partner. And then it becomes not a dialogue, but a visit. So the visitor comes over, and then the host says, I would like to, let's just use, for example, loneliness. I want to take you down my street of loneliness. Now, the visitor has to repeat that by saying, what I heard you say is that you want to invite me down the street of loneliness. Am I with you? Now, you'd be surprised how difficult it is for the partner to remember those words. And they're only 5 or 6 words. I want to take you down the street of loneliness. So that's 10. So they have, and you'd be surprised I have to go over it and over it until they get it precisely, because the host needs to hear that they did get it. And then, so it takes a long time to do this. I can't do this in less than 2 hours. So what I have created are intensives, 2-day intensive, 8 hours each day. So that usually will give them enough tools and enough resources, enough skills to go home and do it the way I taught them. And then they don't need me anymore. They've got the program, they've got the format, or the equation, whatever you want to call it. And I give them, I give them a notebook that has all this in it also. So that's presencing, listening, and with very few words. And it goes on. In other words, when she says, I want to take you down the street of loneliness, what I heard you say is that you want to take me down the street of loneliness. Am I with you? Because that he has that. And then she can say yes. And if he misses a word, she has to say, you've got most of it, but what I really want you to hear, and say it again till he gets it right.
Wow.
Then it's her turn again as a host to say, I feel lonely when you don't come home early. That's only, I feel lonely when you don't come home early, 9 words. And he can't respond to it. He can't defend himself. He can't give his own excuse, or he can't even apologize. All he can do is say, what I heard you say is that you feel lonely when I don't come home early. Am I with you? And then he has to say, tell me more. Tell me more. That's up to him to say, and it could be her, actually. I'm just using this in order to give you the example. So he says, tell me more. And then she tells him, it hurts when I have dinner ready at 7 o'clock and you don't call. Okay, and that's all she can say. That's even more words than I usually, that I would make her stop it. It hurts when you don't come home when I make dinner. I don't call, but come at the next time. So we chunk it down. So he hear each word and he repeats it. And after he repeats it and he gets it right, then he says, tell me more again. And this goes on. It can take up to 2 hours. It can take 1 hour. It can take 10 minutes. It's up to her to say, and I'm only using her and him, like right now. She could say, I feel complete. I feel satiated. He got it. So, and then what goes into that next is I ask him as the visitor to essentialize everything that she said. It doesn't have to be word for word anymore. He has to essentialize what she means, what's going on. And so he does that. And then after that, I ask each of them to give an appreciation to the other person for their participation in it. So they have a sense of gratitude now. And then after that's over with, there's a lot more I can play with, but at the end, I ask them to, what does this space feel like now? And that takes up to 2 hours. At first they come in, they're tense, they're nervous, they're angry. But at the end of a session, I ask them to give me a few words. What does it feel? What does the space now feel like? They might say something safe, or good, better. And whatever word they say, I repeat it so that they hear it again. And so that's pretty much, and then, we process it a little bit afterwards, what's your takeaway from this? And you don't even have to do that, but I do it because I want to make sure that I understand that they understand how the process works.
Mhm.
That's kind of a different way the concept goes on, but when you go into it more, and that's the intention, is I take a role of saying to, let's say her, I would say, did anybody in your life ever make you feel lonely? And boy, and just give me the first thing that comes to your mind. And it always is back in childhood, maybe they felt abandoned or they were left alone, or because these feelings are, they're universal and they have a timeline to it. So that's pretty much, and then we go into the inner child work from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yes, the inner child work, that's like a whole other that's a whole other episode, because it is so powerful. And yeah, like I've just been in that space for maybe the last 3 years with myself, just doing my inner child work. But yeah, that's not something that gets resolved overnight either. I love the example that you shared. That's just, I can see how that would start cleaning up the space that we've polluted with those other things. I have a question for you. So I've had mixed experience with therapists, and I have clients who also have gone to therapy and really didn't find it that it really helped them ahead. So it's more of a, how do we, as just an average person, how do we discern a good therapist from maybe a not so good therapist?
Well, that's true. I mean, what you're saying is very accurate. With all the skills that I've learned, and believe me, I have certifications. I don't even have wall space to hang them. After over 44 years, and I've learned a lot of techniques, a lot of wonderful technology, EMDR, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, a lot of chair work, Hal Stone's work, Virginia Satir's work. It goes all the way back. You learn this because you have to take certain amount of credits every few years. So you acquire all these wonderful skills and all these wonderful techniques. I do hypnosis. Oh my goodness, it goes on. But I have found from my own personal experience that the most important thing between the client and the therapist is the therapeutic relationship, and how you are being perceived by your client. And if they feel safe, because your job is to make them feel safe, otherwise they won't do this work. And if they feel, she got me, she really got me. If you feel that, and that comes really from, I think experience is very important. I mean, I'm 82. I have been through every possible thing you can just imagine in life. I'm finally getting it, that we are on this journey. And I mean, I was married a few times, divorced a few times, had 5 children. I was the only one in my whole block and my whole neighborhood that had 5 kids. And been divorced. I lost a daughter. She was a PhD psychologist from bipolar disorder. And just all the trials and tribulations of my life and experience. It's how I, kind of like picked myself up and wiped myself off, put my boots back on, put my big girl panties back on, and went on and used, all my skills, practicing what I preach, to give me, the ability not to just be a victim of these circumstances, but to be not just even a survivor, but to be like that mythological bird, the phoenix that rises from the ashes. And so, but by helping people go through what I've been through personally, not just professionally, I help myself that way by helping others. So it's very rewarding. And I think it's important to have, you don't have to have an 82-year-old therapist by any means, but I think you need an experienced therapist professionally and personally, who really can relate to the pain and the anguish, the grief, and the sorrow of their clients. Now, I do a lot of recovery work, second stage recovery work, not first stage, with to addicts. But I myself have never been a substance abuse addict. I've been an addict, a codependent, but it doesn't matter whether it's a codependency, whether it's eating disorders, whether it's drugs or alcohol. It's the addiction, that pathological relationship with either a substance, a person, or a behavior that has mood altering effects and life threatening consequences, something you can't stop. So I never went through alcoholism, or I never went to AA, but I understand addiction. And it's kind of like if you're a businessman and you're selling a product and you're very successful, let's say you're selling software, and that's your main business, chances are you can open up another business and sell women's lingerie, because it's not the content, it's the structure that matters. Do I make sense?
Yes, 100%. Yeah. And I do feel you on the trust piece. I think as soon as you said that, I was like, yeah, that's where that wasn't existent for me, and the experiences that weren't so positive. And I also didn't know the questions to necessarily ask you when I was looking. So are there any, would you have any tips in terms of like somebody searching for a therapist, some key questions that they could ask to determine the fit?
Well, I will tell you this, that 90% of my clients come from self-referrals. Okay. I spend a lot of money on social media and SEOs and my website. And actually 90% come from people that have been to me or know about me. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of speaking, and I've got my books, but like from this, I've done many podcasts from all over the world. And the problem with that is that I'm only licensed in the state of Florida. So I'm pretty limited on what I can do, but people do fly down and spend time with me. So, if they want to, but I can do, I also, by the way, I'm a life coach. I'm a certified life coach. So if I can't do it under the therapy, I can do part of it under the life coach. So, but most of my clients come to me through self-referral, and the questions that they ask, are very, very personal to them. Like I'll get a lady call me this week. Do you see children? That's one of they'll go be very specific. No, I don't see children unless I see the family, the parents, because you can't effectuate change in a child without considering family therapy. Questions would be, how much do you charge? That's a big one. How long does therapy last? And that's a difficult question to answer. What kind of modality do you do? That's a good question to ask. Are you an experiential therapist, or are you cognitive behavioral therapist? Or, and I'm both. I've been trained in both. But the inner child work is a lot of experiential, but you still have to use the cognitive as well. Are you spiritual? Because some people want to be connected to somebody that's not necessarily religious, but believes in a higher power. And based on what their need is. You do couples therapy. Are you familiar with bipolar disorder? That whatever is in their own personal lexicon is what they usually ask. But basically, by the time they call me, make an appointment, they know pretty much about me. I always tell everyone that calls that I've never been with before, go on my website, see my face, read some of my blogs, and I have blogs covering 150 different topics, from relationships to inner child work to conversations with my dog, and I try to stay out of politics because I really don't want to incite anybody. Even though I have my own opinion, I try to keep that away from my website. Because it's not going to help. It doesn't help me at all just to be political. If anyone starts getting political in the middle of my sessions, I'll say, can you reserve that for your friends or for your partners? Because I don't know enough about politics. I tell them this is my forte, therapy. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I think that's great. And I you're right. Like it will be to whatever is happening in our life at that moment that's going to guide a lot of that. But yeah, asking the cognitive versus experiential and asking about the therapist experience and just kind of, and then also like getting the feel of it, but doing research. And I do love word of mouth, especially because if it's people close to us, we see that they've gotten results. So it does help us feel the comfort level, I guess, with engaging with somebody. So
Right, you have to they won't do the work unless they feel safe, and they trust is a big part, confidentiality. And I give them a little bit of an orientation before they come, and I tell them to write, to look at my website, and I give them a life history questionnaire to fill out. It's about 21 pages. And depending upon their response, some of them will say, oh, I can't do that. It's too much. Or when I get the response, when I read it, because I read it and I use a highlighter to see, with something that stands out. I learn a lot from their responses. And if I get one that's basically very scarce or sparingly, I know that they're not really forthcoming just by the way they answer it or don't answer it. Some of them write pages and they love it because it's like priming the pump. They're thinking about things that they've never thought about. And then at the end, I ask them, what did they think about this questionnaire? And a lot of them will say, it was very interesting, or I learned a lot about myself. And then some will say, too long,
Yeah.
repetitive. And I deliberately repeat certain concepts just so it's kind of like an MMPI, I wrote it myself. It's original. And I change it every once in a while. I go into very provocative issues. I'll start out with things like, what was it like growing up with your family? And what was your relationship with your mom and dad? So before they even come to me the first time, I get a real good picture, of who I'm dealing with and what I'm dealing with. And the way they write, if they write very tiny, that tells me something. If they write large, that tells me something. So it's a great tool for me to get connected, to know that person. That's called the life history questionnaire. Yeah, it's really very helpful.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I love that. And even just, I don't know what the different sizes of writing mean, but I imagine there are some messages there. That ties beautifully. So I know you're offering the audience a gift, and oh my goodness, could you speak a little bit to what that is?
Yes, I am offering a session. It can be individual or it can be a couple session. And it's the value, I charge $245 for a session. So that's my gift to anyone that wants to take me up on it. I'd be happy to provide you with a 1 hour session.
Thank you, Joan. And where can everybody find you to get more of your blogs and all the information? Where do you live the most? Where can they find the most of this amazing work that you're doing?
Well, I think the best thing to do is to look at my website, which is joanechilds.com, JOAN, middle initial E, CHILDS.com. In there's just about everything you needed to know about me. I live in Hollywood, and since the pandemic, I practice in my home. I have a home office. I don't give the address, obviously, because it's a home, but I do have a telephone number on there, and I do have an email, joanechilds@gmail.com. And my telephone number is 954-854-7764. You can dial 1 before it, or sometimes you don't even have to. And that's about it. I don't know what the code is to get to the United States if you're living in Poland or anywhere outside of the United States. But I think anyone that lives there will know how to get into it. I'm actually seeing somebody from China right now, but I'm basically doing life coaching with her. So it's been really wonderful meeting you, and I'm very, very grateful that you gave me this opportunity to meet your guests. And I hope
Thank you. Yeah, and then I'm so grateful for your energy and your wisdom, and just want to say to everybody watching, take what you learned in this episode and start applying so that you actually elevate from these conversations that we're offering with these amazing experts like Joan. and start reclaiming your relationships. And definitely I will have all the information around Joan's website and her phone number linked in with the interview so that it's easy peasy to find her. And we're so grateful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And thank you again too.
You're welcome. We'll see you guys on the next episode.